Well, let's start with this series of 3 lectures by Professor Mohammed Abouzaid from Columbia and Stanford. And the subject of these lectures will be Floer Homotopy theory. Mohammed?
Thank you. So I know that the subject that I'm going to talk about is not exactly the subject that many people in the audience have thought about. So I'm going to try to start this lecture to be understandable. And one way to do so is to remember that when we think about homomorphic curves and the information that we can extract from homomorphic curves, there's like 4 layers of complexity. One thing you could do is you could try to discount. And this leads to homomorphic invariance. And of course, we have other kinds of counts, but if you do homomorphic curves, then I think homomorphic invariance is reasonable. And the next thing you could do is you could try to define the chain complex. And this leads to what's called Floer homology. And in some sense, the passage from this first step to the second step is some passage from closed manifolds to manifolds with boundary. A little bit more structure here. When you think about manifolds with boundary, you have to think manifolds with boundary, and you also have to be very careful about understanding products. And then the next step in complexity is when you just instead of having just the chain complex, you have algebraic structures on a chain complex. And what I would say is that this is the story we tell about, in the A infinity algebra, but in the kind of simplest setting, maybe if you know something about the Floer theory, say in the exact setting. And when you try to think about the geometry of the situation, it's still essentially manifold with boundaries or product, maybe that are just like corners and stuff that happen. But then there's a little bit extra stuff, which is that you have to start thinking it's not just enough to be able to take the product, you also have to kind of start taking some symmetries into account. And then finally, the highest level of complexity that we encounter in the subject is, in some sense, a subset of this, but it's a subset of this that behaves very differently, in the sense that here, what you do is you start with your chain complex and quickly just the structure, but there's something else you can do, which is this kind of curved algebraic structures. And here, I'm not going to write something because it's the same thing, so I'm just going to take phi over is what more good to say. And at the level of this, geometry, not much has changed, and it's essentially the same. But the reason that I like to distinguish this from the other ones is that, while from some kind of naive categorification point of view, it's the stuff is really, really very different, because here you constructed something and you build a structure on top of it, and here you just have to do it. So these lectures, so here I was writing chain complex, and I was imagining a great structure that I had in mind, the infinity algebra. So these lectures are about what to do. So what to do when you take this story and you try to lift it from ordinary homology, like this Floer homology is known to be isomorphic to ordinary homology when you don't have any homology disks, for example. We want to lift this homology to, let's say, ordinary homology to generalized mode. So why would we want to do this? Well, I mean, we don't really have a very good reason. I mean, there's some few applications so far. But I think the real reason is that when you tell the story, then you realize that every time you do it in ordinary homology, you can actually float manifolds. You know, okay, the moduli space is, the stable in G curve, the G is 0 curve, this is a nice situation is a closed manifold of some dimension. But when you extract homological invariance from it, what you usually do is you say, well, I'm going to take a bunch of cycles, I'm going to restrict, I'm going to kind of intersect add some mark points and count how many curves pass through a given set of cycles. Of course, you write things differently, but at the end of the day, that's really all that's happening. So in this story, you really only use zero-dimensional manifolds. And when you pass to defining Floer homology, maybe you use 0 and 1-dimensional. Which is why this thing about being not very careful that manifolds of boundary, manifolds of corners, it's not really an issue for this story. And similar, all the way down. And again, it's not the way I'm saying it, it's not completely precise, because there's different implementations of Floer homology, for example, or for Floer homology, you can assume that you have some situation where two Lagrangians meet non-transversely, and then maybe you use the Duran theory on the intersection as a model for your Floer change. It looks like really using the entire structure of the moduli space. But in practice, there is a model which is a more theoretic model in which everything reduces to 0 and 1 dimension. And nothing in higher dimension could be more precisely, nothing in higher codimension. So you could just out of a matter of curiosity, you can just ask what kind of structure is encoded by this by the higher dimensional one. And in this lecture, in this first lecture, I'm going to just try to stick to this part. And tomorrow I will, talk about this part in the morning. And depending how it goes, maybe I'll say a little bit more about the other things in the engine. Okay. So, what does it mean to count? Well, so now I have to talk a little bit about what I mean by generalized homology. I assume this is not something that everybody's familiar with. So instead of So generalized homology is supposed to be generalized homology theory. It's supposed to be Hunter. From topological spaces to greater Wheeler groups. And it's satisfying from some set of axioms. And so basically you take topological space and you have some group associated to it. And the most fundamental case that we care about is the case of a point. So in particular, I'm going to call this the lowest. So in particular, the lowest there's some kind of distinguished greater than abelian group. It's called the coefficients. Coefficients of this theory. Now, when we do ordinary homology, then we know how to compute this. So in the ordinary case, this is just is supported in degree 0. It's just an abelian group, not greater. But the interesting, so of course, if you have something, if you want to manufacture such a thing, it's pretty easy. What you do is you take ordinary homology, you just shift it in degree. Okay, that's what you would call very uninteresting generalized homology theory. The interesting, the key fact that kind of makes stable homotopy theory possible is that there are, in fact, other interesting homology theories, other generalized homology theories, and they were discovered in the 60s. So the two key examples are K-theory and let me just say since I'm talking about and borders. Okay. So K-theory, the only thing that I want to say is that the natural definition of this is actually gives you something. It's not quite a homology way of saying it, so this is between functors, so it's covariance. So this is usually given the natural sense of give you a homology theory. In the sense that it's contravariant. And I'm going to just assume that people have some idea what K theory is. The fine K theory is you take you take complex vector, but also just purely topological notion on your space. Modulo the equivalence of stable isomorphism, if you sufficiently define it. Modulo equivalence of stable isomorphism, and then that gives you something in degree 0. But then you realize that actually you can also define something in degree 1 by taking your space, you take the product of S1, then some kind of reduction. And then you think, well, how do I get the higher ones? Well, there's this magical Bob periodicity theorem that tells you that, in fact, if you take the product of S2, you have what you started with. So that's key. And Bordism, so this is the one that's going to be the most interesting for us. So Bordism is defined differently. This is defined using that. So there are two, from the perspective that I take, the way that I like to say this is somehow, if you have these, if you know and if you understand these generalized homology theory, then all the other ones that have ever appeared, that anybody's ever studied, essentially come, small exaggeration, but essentially come from these theories after applying some algebraic operations. Okay? So it turns out that in the world of homology theory, you can, localize at a prime, complete at a prime, or you can take a summand, or you can take an extension, and you can do a lot of algebraic operations. But at the end of the day, if somebody tells you about some interesting homology theory that they're studying, with few exceptions, you can bring them back through a series of deduction to one of these two. So the theory of Bordism is going to be relevant to us precisely because, in the simplest situations, when you look at the holomorphic curve theory, what we have, as I said earlier, is some kind of flow manifold that somehow now we have to start being a little bit more precise. So soon we'll have to be a little bit more precise. So let me explain how Bordism is defined. Okay, so the Bordism group space X. So I'm going to denote this letter N Later I will switch this into different notation. And this is nk of x. So this is going to be set of maps and from a manifold of dimension k. To the topological space, modulo some relation, and this relation is the Borden relation, which says that basically that M1 with its map to X, I'm not going to name the map, M2 with its map to X are considered to be equivalent if there is some manifold with boundary of one higher dimension has a map to X. And the boundary of W is the union of M1 and M2. I just want to say one thing, which is that why that's relevant for us. If you are imagining that you have, for example, some symplectic manifold, axis, and we're in a situation where graph theory is as simple as possible. So from M, G, N bar, X, and I'm going to drop I'm going to actually some such a thing, maybe some class beta. But now I want to add a little bit more data because I'm a symplectic person, I'm going to add this J. Okay? And this happens to be smooth manifold. Well, then I'm just drop the word smooth, so you don't have to worry. For the technical people don't have to worry. Manifold for some given J. And almost complex. J. Then what you should expect is that the invariant that you can extract out of this moduli space is not exactly the map, the evaluation map from this to. So we can expect to get that the evaluation map from n bar to Pn x beta here, which is x to the n. Okay, which is just, we have these points and we just evaluate. Okay. So this map by itself is not invariant, but that it's invariant under words. I.e., it gives a distinguished element in this what I call this unrelated. And this is this, I don't know, this is where the graph is there. Now, the statement is not precise because I said that something happens to be a manifold. That's never a good enough reason. Okay. If you, what you need always is for there to be a good reason for there to be a manifold. Something positivity assumption, blah, and having put a G here, becomes very difficult to ensure this. But anyway, the expectation is that if you have a good reason for it to be a manifold, what it means for this to be invariant under Bordism, i.e., if you pick a different, pick a J prime, a different J prime, then a path from J to J prime produces the cobordism that we are looking for. Okay, so this is the basis of what we are doing. This is basically the starting point of Floer Homotopy. Now, having said this, you should already have some idea for why, for how the rest of the story is going to continue. Because, today I'm saying, you have these elements, you have these fundamental classes, they are invariant. But already I said that geometry gives you not just these classes, but the actual witness to the fact that these classes are equal. And that will be essential when you try to do the next step and the next step and so on and so forth. To start remembering not just the classes themselves, but how what is it that proves their equality. So this group that I talked about here this is called the unoriented Bordian group. Has the advantage that it can be defined in one line. It's not the most interesting homology theory, and the reason that it's not the most interesting, well, first it's not the most interesting homology theory because it turns out to be it's too tortured. By basic geometric argument, which is that if you give me a manifold like this, and I can just draw this picture. So 2 times it, this is the coordinate, or 2 times that. Now, of course, I didn't say some stuff here. What is addition? Addition is disjunct union. What is the zero element? That's an abelian group. What is the zero element? The zero element is the empty manifold. There's not much to say. But for this, you can now start decorating things and get interesting ones. By equipping with extra structure. We get other homologies. And the prominent ones are, so there's one called omega. This is just oriented coordinate. So in oriented coordinate, you see this trick doesn't work because if you try to put this with the product orientation here, they're both things. You end up with one orientation on this side and the opposite orientation on the other side. It doesn't show that the thing is zero. It's not true anymore. There is something which is called U. So this is stably complex coordinates. So here, what you do is you give yourself the structure of an isomorphism between the tangent space of M and some complex vector space. Some complex vector of it. But then you assume that this is only stable. So. But up to some trivial factors, you have an isomorphism. And then there is the last one, which I don't know if I'm just going to call it F today because I'm not going to use this notation anyway. And this is called frameworkism. And here you basically have the same data except the complex vector bundle is trivial. So, and I'm going to look. For the people who haven't seen this before, it's important here that you need to remember all this data. This is not a property; it's a structure. So you need to keep track of it. So in particular, when I said two things are equivalent when they're accordant, now you have to say, in the frame case, for example, that there is a stable framing on this cobordism whose restriction to M1 and M2 agrees stably, which means up to adding additional factors with the framing that we start. So what we noticed is that, so I tend to use one notation for all these groups. I tend to use this notation. And then I decorate this notation with some family of compacting groups. So I tend to write this as omega SO, and this as omega U, and this as omega trivial group, and then the one which we started with here. So for the purposes of Floer homotopy, so for the purposes of like people who do stable homotopy theory, people who aren't thinking about suitable curves or thinking about symmetry necessarily, the most important cohomology theory is no doubt frame bordism. So frame bordism is what they call the sphere structure, or stable homotopy. Oh, sorry. And it's somehow the thing that, if you take a homotopy theory class, the first thing you do is you maybe define the homotopy groups of space, and then you're told that unlike ordinary homology, stable homotopy doesn't have the property that when you suspend it, doesn't have a it doesn't have the property that when you suspend you get basically a form. Anyway, when you suspend, you get the same homology groups. So what you could do is you could just stabilize it. Just take the product of sk from large and large k and pick out the part that you think comes from x, and then take the limits as k goes to infinity. Okay, but for our purposes, for the purposes of symplectic things or mirror symmetry things, this is the most important one. So we'll focus on complex bordism. And the reason is that simply that this structure of having a trivialization of the tangent space which does not exist, a stable trivialization of the tangent space which does not exist for a general, symplectic manifold or a general complex basic curve. But it does, the stable complex structure moduli space closed to all the curves. As a natural stable complex. And to be precise, again, when it happens to be again, so at its correct vertices. Okay, in fact, if you're coming from algebraic geometry, you don't even have to say the word stable, okay? Because the modular space is some kind of wasn't projective stack, no projective stack. But this is like a space, and so I feel like I should say these words. as a subjective person, I mean, the point is that it's just not true when this almost complex structure is not integrable. You don't actually have an almost complex structure because the linearization of the Cauchy-Riemann operator is not complex linear. And this I here that I wrote is really meant to be the index bundle. It's basically meant to be you take the operator and you kill off all the non-complex linear terms in some sense, and it turns out that they're all in fact operators. So it doesn't. You still have this isomorphism, and this isomorphism occurs stably because you don't know that you have subjectivity in the operator property. Anyway, so that being said, so that means that what I was saying over here about having a fundamental class in this oriented dualism group, okay, really what we should do is we should say, so we expect fundamental class in not in the unoriented ordinal group, but in the oriented. Don't get into this teaching. Or data, and I'm going to drop the J. Okay. Now, so far I've been. If this was the actual story with its technicalities, then the talk could have been given in 1992. Okay. But that's not the real thing. That's not what actually happens. And the reason that we cannot, the story is not this simple, is because these moduli spaces are not in general manifest. And I'm going to say rarely. And if you take this, if you encounter this, then there are several things you can do. You could just say, well, maybe what I could do is not try to record the whole information. Maybe I can still extract from it some non-trivial generalized homology invariant by passing maybe to one of these algebraically constructed cohomology theories. And I will say something like that. But before doing that, let me just say what the expected story is. So even though it's not smooth, as we all know, it all has some kind of structure that you can write in terms of maybe smooth objects. Now, algebraic geometers have this formulation of a perfect obstruction theory, and I don't fully understand it. So I will, and I don't think it's exactly equivalent to what I'm saying. I think it's not equivalent to what I'm saying. So I'm going to give the kind of some topological thing, but again, if you haven't thought about such things, you should basically imagining that now coming from something that's analogous to happen. So the structure that we have in general, instead, the structure, and I'm going to use my term and then I'll switch to other people's term. The structure of a Carnosian space. Now, you may be more familiar with this, with the language saying that it is a derivative. And for a long time, whenever anybody asked me about, like, can you really prove that the moduli space is a derived overfold, I would say, we could prove it if we were willing to put the work in it, but it's just too painful and we don't see any good reason to prove it. So I'm sorry that it should be a derived overfold, but you can't just quote it. The difficulties for proving it are kind of multiple. One of which had to do with, maybe I should say with the derived orbifolds. So what do I mean by derived orbifold? First, i.e., that it is, you can present it, and I'll explain it. Present it as the zero locus of a section of an orbital bundle of an orbifold vector bundle on an orbit. So the basic idea is that, if I give you a manifold, let me just call the manifold T, and I give you some vector bundle on it, let's just call vector bundle O. And then if I have a section, so this is your section, some other section. Well, then there's some zeros. And if you are, if it's really a manifold, then you can just choose things generically. You can just forget about T and forget about O and only remember the zero locus. But if this T, in fact, is an orbifold, and I'm just going to think about it geometrically like, this is not the precise definition, but you just take the coarse space and you realize that this coarse space has some kind of singularities. Okay. Then the zeros that occur on the singularities, you can't push them away. You can't achieve transversality. So you can do somehow. It's a genuinely, so in the manifold case, it's the same theory that you kind of study derived orbifolds in which the underlying, to study derived manifolds, what I'm trying to say. Then you just get Bordism theory of manifolds and nothing new. But if you study derived orbifolds, then it's really genuinely a different notion. So now, again, I'll go back to what I was just trying to say 2 minutes ago, which is that why can I not say this? And now finally, I'm not telling any lies. This is actually the truth. We really know that this is true. So the long-lasting difficulty of proving one, that there is an actual orbifold and an actual vector bundle on it, so that whose zero locus is what we want. Okay. So here what I would call is something like local to global patching. So another way to say that because when I told the story at the beginning, really in Floer theory so far, we haven't needed to construct things of higher dimensions. We really only need, more precisely, you don't need to understand things away from codimension one. You only need to, you don't need to understand kind of the top stratum and the boundary. People haven't needed, especially to Kaya, they need to be very careful about how you go from local pieces where you obviously have this picture to a global structure. So at the time, whatever, if you asked me like before John wrote his thesis, I would have said, well, obviously be true, but it's not gonna, it's not in the literature. And I would say kind of, part of solve this problem. 16. And then there is some more annoying difficulty, which unfortunately makes it hard to directly quote this, which is smoothness. Which is that basically, the theory of derived orbifold, if you ask somebody who wants to think about it without theoretic settings in mind, they will probably work with smooth manifolds and smooth vector bundles and so on and so forth. But the fact that pseudo-homological curve theory gives you smooth manifolds is very, very hard to prove, and it's a subject of much acrimony. And like, for example, I don't know how to proof, but if you look at the proof and what is written, it really does it in codimension one. It's clear that it's going to work in higher codimensions. If you were to write it, then good luck to you. So anyway, so this was solved solvents and joint work combined by trick. No, I'm going to say. Yeah. But our solution is like kind of just, it's just a solution so that we can say it's smooth, it's in a proper universe that we would get excommunicated for it. It's just not going to solve that trick. And I don't want to say more about how it's done. But nonetheless, no, so these days you can genuinely say that well, actually, for higher genus, the paper was just released by Hershey and Sominatma. So we did it for a few things. Anyway, so nowadays we really have this structure of closed modular spaces. Not interested from the archive. This, just kind of did it. H. I don't remember if they posted it before or after the new year. I think they posted it before. So it's 22. And the one thing that I want to say is that the construction that they gave, which generalizes some genus zero construction we gave earlier, the construction is extremely geometric. Like it's I mean here you can just say, well, the right overfold. Maybe there's some people in the audience that don't know that the right overfold is, or maybe are not comfortable with it, or we bundle is. But in fact, you get something extremely geometric. What you get is a manifold, an open manifold, a Lie group acting on it, an equivariant vector bundle, and an equivariant section. So it's somehow an derived overfold presented in the most concrete way that you could look for. So in fact, I'm going to say A, construction. Here's all the data. On a manifold. T. So that's this T here that we were talking about, but not quite, not related to it. And that's the quotient that I was talking about there. Compact group. G. Acting with T. That covariant vector bundle. I call it O, I guess I'm stuck with it now. O over T, and finally equivariant section. S. With S inverse of 0 mod G being equivalent to, again, and R and then the given 0 and X big and J, and the dated, higher G's. So, there's this joke that if you're stuck in a cocktail party with mathematicians and you're not a mathematician, they tell you what they do, then you can just ask them, can you do it equivariantly? So, I mean, everything that I described here, everyone's familiar with not equivariantly, but it's group, and then you just do the whole thing equivariantly. Now, so here I'm talking about the language involving compact groups, and here I'm saying some language involving the right overfold. So the reason that this language is better than that language is because this G is not an intrinsic part of the data. Yes. Hershey, there's an R. This is Swaminathan. So I think if you just search like higher genus Gromov-Witten invariance, on the archive. The paper was up, in December. So again, I'm gonna, I think many different people in the audience, so I don't want to assume from here to the notion, but that notion I think I can assume. So just like I defined at the beginning, some kind of Bordism group, I just left, talk about space X, blah, blah, blah. So we have Bordism group. And I'm going to write B. Oh my God. Okay. And here you can put whatever declaration you want, and I'm just going to skip the declaration and just not say anything. And because I'm not going to say anything, it really means O, it means unoriented case. And this is generated exactly like before. I'm going to say it in terms of this data of the kind of O and T and G and B X, and then this is the section S. Okay. So now we have a map from this to X. Then you do the same thing in one of the equivalence relation. And now the equivalence relations are more complicated. So the equivalence relation, the equivalence relation is generated by so one small point that I should have made earlier. When you define the Bordism group, you have to assume that the M's are compact inside this data. Okay? Or you have to assume that they are compact. So similarly here, I'm implicitly, just because we all know that this thing is proper, implicitly assuming that S inverse mod G is proper. Okay, so the equivalence relation is, well, you could solve something like cobordism. Let's call it Bordism instead of cobordism, just like before. And Bordism means basically that you see most of this data is just internal. This doesn't interact much with X. It's really the space T that has a map to X. This map needs to be G equivariant for the trivial action on X. So this is G invariant. So anyways, we have the Bordism, and Bordism is, I'm not going to write much of this structure. I'm going to say, well, we have T0, T1, and this is G acting here and G acting here. And now we need to interpolate between them by something that's called T01. Something like this. But you have to be a little bit careful. So for G, you need to make sure that this T01 lies in this plot. So again, S inverse 0, 1. Nothing escapes to infinity along the zero locus. If it's not on the zero locus, you can do whatever it wants. And there's two other relations that do not exist in the other case. One of them is the relation that tells you that if you take a group G, that somehow the group G is not an intrinsic part of the data. So there's many ways of saying it, but one way of saying it is quotients by free action. So it says that you have, and let's make it normal, so G acting freely on T. In fact, we only need it to act freely on S, but it doesn't matter. We'll reduce to that case by the Bordism relation. Then T, this data for T, maybe I should write it. T O. Here there was a G, and there was a G. And we set this to be equivalent to the same thing when we modify. There's so you allow yourself to take a quotient like reaction, which basically goes back to what I was saying before, which is that if you, this is measuring, what this is, this theory is supposed to be interesting and delicate and different from ordinary organisms precisely when there are fixed points along the zero locus of the section. And then there's one more relation, which is about basically the Bourdon, the derived part. The derived part is also not intrinsic to the situation, the kind of the actual space accident, the actual vector bundle. So this goes back to what I said about if you have manifolds and you study derived manifolds, there is thing as subordism as ordinary manifolds. And so what you do is you basically say that. So stabilization maybe, which is that you have so you start with this structure, and then you add to it a vector bundle. So give it a vector bundle, again orbital bundle, equivariant vector bundle, G vector bundle, V on T. What you can do is you can then take the total space. You can replace T by the total space. And you can replace O by one with anyway, O direct sum. V, but you can figure out what it means. This has this project down to here, so you can pull back O, and you can also pull back V itself. And this has a projection map, and this has a section, which is this section here, direct sum the identity. And then you again say things. So this is slightly, again, if you say it like this, it's slightly more complicated. But what I want to say is that this relation here, this disappears. So you don't need to stay. You don't need to stay this relation if you use the language of this relation. Can be dropped because it's just implicit. Is missing because it's implicit. If you reformulate using order. And this one, is also in some sense, you can also remove it depending exactly what how you're willing to define the rival. Definition of the rival holding, which this one kind of missing, but I prefer to keep it there because I prefer my thing to be presented by something relatively complete. Okay, so now the claim is so one more thing. So market claim. So I didn't prove that ordinary Bourdism is it defines a generalized homology theory. Okay? But the proof is actually pretty easy. You basically just have to be comfortable with Sard's theorem, the implicit function theorem, really. The hardest step is the proof of my Towards formula, or whatever let's say my Towards, or long exact sequence. So prove that omega is a homology theory that uses basically Sard's theorem. Hardest step is proof of the long sequence for pairs. So suspension as to what is generally stated. What I should have done is usually people define this for pair and then that makes sense. But anyway, but the proof that this theory satisfies is a homology theory is harder. harder. And in fact, it's the same step that's difficult. It's really this kind of long vector sequence. But the issue has to do with gluing. So the issue has to do something like this. So I need to start using some notation. I'm kind of refusing to write any notation. So I'm going to write boldface T for this whole structure T. And it's big. Oh, it's not really long enough. So I have this T here, and I have the sum. So because of all these equivalence relations, you can imagine that you have something called T prime. No, let's do it like this. This is going to be T prime. This is going to be T double prime. It's not a great situation. Okay, and I can assume that the boundary that T is equivalent to the boundary of T prime, and this is also equivalent to the boundary of T double prime. Okay, but equivalence doesn't mean, as in the previous case, that they were different. That equivalent means that well, this Bordism relation I'm going to just not use, because this is really this issue is these two relations, and this one is not a big deal, but this is the problem. So here I'm going to say bistabilization. And now the goal is to glue, is to produce something which would look like T prime union along T and apply this relation with T double prime. You want to kind of, again, if you try to think about the proof of that sequence, at some point you have to take two pieces and you have to show that they come from one piece. And this is some kind of gluing problem. And in the manifold case, the gluing problem ultimately comes down to some kind of choose color, the deterministic structure, and so on and so forth. But here, because of the stabilization, it turns out that in order to be able to do this, you have to know that, well, that this vector bundle V that possibly exists over T, or let's say from T prime, that this vector bundle V embeds in a vector bundle that extends to all of to the T prime. So for this, you need to kind of be able to enlarge vector bundles in order to extend them. And the only way that I'm going to prove this goes back to this language of orbifold, and this is basically user particles and not vector bundle. So this is just some essential. So it's not proved that it's exactly kind of what I said, which is that if you have some kind of reasonable map X to Y and some vector bundle of order spaces, let's say, instead of orbifold, and a vector bundle on X, and of course it need not come from Y. But in the ordinary usual case, you can always take this and stabilize it further to make it trivial. Okay? And then in that case, of course, it comes from. Okay? But that's, of course, being trivial is not something you can really do. You can really expect to achieve in this case. But the statement is that you can always find something new in here so that it's pulled back of you. So that you have an embedding convenience that you pull back of you. And that is an essential step in this gluing thing, an essential step in the proof that this is homological. Perfect. So I'm going to take just 2 minutes to finish what I want to say today. So what this tells us is that if we wanted to, kind of record all the data, this is the fundamental class of the group. So conclusion. Fundamental class of N bar E N X data in this EU, the omega, I'm not going to put a U here, of X to the N has all, well, I mean, maybe we're missing something, but has all complexity invariant data that we know how to record. But unfortunately, we do not know how to compute. Okay. One, we don't know what the coefficients are. What mean or measuring quantities. That's a great ability. Two, even if we knew it, even the case of the underlying case of ordinal motion, in that case where we do know what this is a huge ring. That's a huge ring. Okay, what it is really is that it's a polynomial. It's a polynomial algebra with infinitely many generators of all even digits. But still, this is equal to 2, this is equal to 4, and so on. So it grows really fast. So doing computations with it is not not very convenient. So what you want to do instead, or what we have been doing instead of trying to define things at this level, which you could just do with this, there's no abstraction at this stage. You want to extract information from it by taking by forgetting data. So we're going to take homology theories, let's call it with a map from and instead of trying to record all this data, you want to record just the data of what happens in the image. And it turns out that this already contains a lot of information. And so that's what I will allude to tomorrow at the beginning before moving on and talking about the homology. Thank you.